Good evening and welcome to this Academy Town Square meeting focusing on flooding in the Eastwick community of Southwest Philadelphia. My name is Franco Montalto and I'm a professor in the College of Engineering at Drexel University. Drexel and the Academy have declared 2021 Climate Year, a period during which we have committed to focus our research, our teaching, our public programming like tonight, our exhibitions on all of the acute challenges that climate change pose on society. Our goal has to soberly raise awareness to the various impacts that climate change will have on us, from extreme precipitation to extreme heat, but as importantly, to focus on solutions. Solutions that are much more likely to be successful if they are co-produced by scientists working collaboratively and in partnership with community members, governmental decision makers, and practitioners. Tonight's program was conceived with this goal. As you know, and as you'll hear from the testimonies presented later tonight, Eastwick is a community on the front line of the climate crisis. Exacerbated also by so many historical inequities and insults, flooding has had a profound impact on the Eastwick community. Many studies have been undertaken over the years, yet no plan to mitigate flooding impacts in this community has materialized to date. As the sea rises and storms become more intense, flooding in Eastwick could get worse. But avoiding that outcome has to be our focus now. The time has indeed come to focus the discussion on urgently needed solutions. Tonight's program is being presented in conjunction with the closing weekend of the exhibition Drowning World. This exhibition presents the long-term project of photographer Gideon Mendel, who began photographing major floods in 2007 in both India and the UK. Mendel was struck by the shared vulnerability of people affected by climate change around the world. His arresting portraits capture the common humanity of flood victims in the immediate aftermath of extreme flooding, and often in their own homes. Tropical storm Isaias and its impacts in Eastwick, as well as Hurricane Ida with its impacts throughout our entire region, demonstrate to us that Mendel's photos could have been taken right here. This evening, we invited residents of Eastwick to view the Drowning World exhibit. In this, the second half of the program, those same residents will share their stories with us. And we sincerely hope that this dialogue will help to jumpstart the process of developing a flood mitigation plan for this community. As we begin the program, I'd like to thank the Academy of Natural Sciences of Philadelphia, Drexel University, Eastwick United, and NBC 10 for their assistance in planning the event. And now to kick off the evening, I'd like to invite to the podium NBC 10 investigative reporter Claudia Vargas, who has covered the Eastwick community for years, both with NBC 10 and the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Great. All right, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here to speaking about the Eastwick community, a community that has shown such resilience over the last several years with the flooding, sinking homes, more flooding. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Claudia Vargas. I'm an investigative reporter at NBC 10, and prior to that, I was at the Philadelphia Inquirer. And it was while I was at the Inquirer in 2016 that I first went down to Eastwick to do a story on the sinking homes. And you guys might know a gentleman by the name of Tyrone Beverly, who, great community leader, right? Yeah. And I unfortunately heard that he passed last year, so I was very sorry to hear that. But it was Tyrone who really brought me to Eastwick and showed me the issues that the community really has been facing for so many years. For those who might not be familiar with the sinking home situation, that's over at 69th and Lindbergh Boulevard. And it was a development that came about in the 60s and 70s. And the urban renewal project that was the project that brought these homes, they used silt dredged from the Schuylkill River to where the homes were built. And that's the reason for the settlement in a lot of these homes. So when we did these stories, we showed just every time it rains, just more and more of the soil is erased from the bottom. So you have people with a whole foot, 12 inches of a gap between the floor and the ground below. And it just keeps getting worse every time. Now, fast forward to last year, once I was at NBC 10, and we started doing more stories on climate change and flooding. And that's another big Eastwick problem, which is the reason why we're here today. And really, one of the major challenges for Eastwick is that there's so much water surrounding it. So you have, as most of you know, the Darby Creek, Cobb's Creek, you have the Schuylkill River, the Delaware River. And every time those bodies of water flood, you just get severe flooding. And in recent years, it's been even worse, right? So you've had those 4-foot floods which used to be called 100-year floods because they're supposed to be so infrequent. It's like once in a lifetime, but we've seen 2 of these back to back already. And climate change experts say this is something that's going to just keep coming more and more, and something needs to be done about it. So I'll go ahead and show you guys a clip from a story we recently did on climate change and just showing the issues that the Eastwick community is facing every time this community floods.
From Hurricane Sandy to Tropical Storm Isaias, we are seeing more severe downpours. Flooding keeps slamming one community in Philadelphia. It's an example of how the climate crisis is impacting our area. NBC 10's Claudia Vargas has the story of the Eastwick neighborhood.
The green debris on Leo Brundage's shed door is a flood remnant from last August.
So the water came up to that
Yeah, oh yeah.
Leo took these pictures. The silver structure to the right is the same shed with the debris. The water also went inside his home.
The water was up to here.
He had to replace furniture and appliances.
I lost over about $60,000 of it.
City officials confirmed that more than 4 feet of water took over parts of Eastwick. It's a southwest Philadelphia neighborhood built on marshland. It won't be the last time it sees so much rain and flooding, and it's not just an Eastwick problem. According to the nonprofit group Climate Central, Philly has a nearly 50% chance of getting 4-foot floods once a year until 2030. The likelihood increases the next decade. By 2050, it's almost guaranteed that such floods will happen annually. Scientists at Climate Central say it's a result of the planet getting hotter.
A warmer atmosphere can hold more moisture, and that translates very directly into bigger downpours.
Eastwick is surrounded by 2 creeks and the Schuylkill River, plus the Delaware River is close by.
It's going to be harder for the water to get out of those creeks and rivers, so you're going to have more tendency for the water back up and have more flooding.
So with bigger storms and water levels rising, parts of Eastwick are in trouble. The majority of residents who live there are Black middle class.
Our structural racism plays itself out, in issues like this. You have upstream development that is largely white and wealthy, and downstream development.
Michael Nairn is an urban studies professor at Penn. He explains Eastwick is a downstream development. He and other experts say the overdevelopment upstream in the mostly white suburbs doesn't allow for some of the water to be absorbed naturally.
And so it just shoots down here to Eastwick, eventually overflowing. During the August storm, Cobb's Creek grew 7 feet higher than usual up in the suburbs. By the time it neared Eastwick, it was 12 feet higher than usual.
Nairn says that's detrimental to this community in more ways than one, including an inability to transfer wealth to the next generation.
They can't get the value out of their homes because of the flooding.
The community has been asking for years for the city to help with the flooding.
I don't want to go nowhere, but I want this fixed.
But a fix is likely a long ways away. We spoke with the city's floodplain manager, Josh Leipert.
Is there anything you guys can actually do to try to stop some of that flooding right now?
There's no short-term solution to stop flooding. This is a natural floodplain.
The city engaged the Army Corps of Engineers with a long-term plan study.
Whether it's elevations of homes, it's buyouts of homes, relocations of properties.
The study would offer recommendations, and then the city would work with the residents on actual solutions. Another multi-year process. Back on Saturn Place, where Leo Brundage has lived for more than 30 years, he says the flooding has worsened each decade.
Was the flooding gotten more intense or more frequent?
More intense.
But he says he still loves living there.
It's beautiful here.
He just wants the flooding to be addressed. With climate change, that will be more of a challenge. I'm Claudia Vargas, NBC 10 News.
And as you heard Leo say, it's not so much the frequency, it's really the intensity of these storms that are affecting residents. And another thing that you saw in that story was the fact that these studies have been going on for years. And even going back to 2016, when I did those original stories on the sinking homes, there's been an ongoing study as to what the city should do, what the state should do about Eastwick. And I think residents are really frustrated, at least the ones I've spoken to, with just the lag in solutions. And as you heard Leo say, he doesn't want to move from his home. And I think that's the case for a lot of Eastwick residents. It's a nice place to live. They're nice homes. They just want the flooding to be dealt with in some way. And I think you'll hear from some of those residents later tonight. So with that, I'll turn it over back to Franco.
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you for your reporting and your attention to Eastwick and to this problem and to climate change in general. So the next presenter I'd like to introduce is Ted Pickett, who is the president of Eastwick United. Ted is unfortunately not able to be here tonight, so he's joining us through Zoom. So I ask you to call your attention to the screen.
Thank you, Franco. And thank everyone for attending tonight. We really appreciate it. Claudia, in her opening, mentioned Tyrone Beverly. Let's start with a little history about Eastwick United. Tyrone Beverly had the vision of uniting the Eastwick community under one umbrella. And he actually created the name of Eastwick United. As Claudia mentioned, unfortunately, Tyrone passed away in 2020, but we are carrying out his vision. Eastwick United Community Development Corporation is a collaborative of community-based stakeholder organizations that have come together with a unified voice to achieve social, economic, environmental, and justice for all Eastwick residents. There are 4 community organizations and 2 faith-based entities in this collective. They are Clearview, which is also known as Citizens for the Cleanup of Lower Darby Creek, Eastwick Action Committee, you may know as Eastwick Friends and Neighbors also, Eastwick Community Network, and Town Gardens, which, by the way, is where Tyrone lived and what Claudia mentioned about the sinking homes. In addition, the faith-based organizations are Eastwick United Methodist and St. Paul AME Church. In addition, one of our goals is to include other stakeholder partners under Eastwick United. They would be Philadelphia International Airport and the John Hines National Wildlife Refuge. Eastwick United Community Development Corporation is a nonprofit organization comprised of concerned residents, stakeholders, and community supporters. Our mission statement is to preserve, protect, and improve the quality of life for all residents and businesses in Eastwick. Lastly, our vision is to promote meaningful engagement among all community stakeholders, participate in the establishment and implementation of efforts made toward planning, revitalization, restoration, and/or redevelopment initiatives in Eastwick to ensure optimal economic education, environmental and social equality for Eastwick residents and stakeholders. With that, I'll turn it back over to Franco. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you so much, Ted. With that, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Executive Director of Eastwick United, Ms. Carolyn Wilson.
Good evening. And I'm just so glad to see that so many of you were able to come out. You saw this awesome presentation by Claudia Vargas of all the interviews that have been done over the years to take a look at our problem out there. And now what I'd like to do, rather than talking and speaking, I believe a picture is worth 1,000 words. And here's why you are here tonight. Here's why we have to speak with a united voice. Here's why we need to do what we need to do to advance the Eastwick community.
Scream at the top of my lungs and wait. Strange how no one is listening. Trapped in a crowded room, but I feel so alone tonight. Would anybody care if I disappeared? swim inside the sea of my deepest fears. Trying to kick to the surface, but I feel so alone tonight. I think I need to save myself. Ooh, I think I need to save myself. Ooh, I think I need to save myself. Ooh, I think I need to save myself. Cling to a thread of light and wait. Look to the stars and see what they say. Hope doesn't seem so far away when I close my eyes. And nothing's gonna change if I just stay still. Gonna find a way, gonna climb this hill. Breaking the chains, gonna save myself. I think I need to save myself. Ooh, I think I need to save myself. Ooh, I think I need to save myself. Ooh, I think I need to save myself. Think I need to save myself.
Thanks so much for such a moving video to get it started. So my research group and my students have had the privilege of being able to work with the Eastwick community for a number of years in various capacities. And part of what we're doing is research to support the development of solutions. And so the next part of the program is a short presentation by me, just talking to you a little bit about some of the tools that we've developed that we hope can be useful in this next phase of hopefully developing solutions for Eastwick. I want to acknowledge a lot of the work that I'll be talking about tonight was produced through a series of grants from NOAA with various partners. Drexel University is part of a consortium of universities from Philadelphia up to Boston that are looking at the impacts of climate change in the Northeast corridor. And that's our CC-run team. A lot of the modeling that I'm going to show you tonight, some of the simulations were developed by Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, New Jersey, who we're working with on another NOAA grant. And then I'm happy to announce we've just received another grant from NOAA to work with the Penn Water Center and Hunter College to continue the work. And I would be remiss to not mention many students at Drexel who have heard about the flooding problem and wanted to collaborate as part of their dissertation work down to some of their undergraduate projects. So just wanted to mention all of that. The way that we've structured the research to support the development of solutions is to develop tools, simulation tools. So I'm an engineer. Engineers develop tools that can help to ask questions about infrastructure. So we've developed a model of the entire watershed, the entire Darby-Cobbs watershed, all of the communities that are upstream of Eastwick. And that model goes all the way down through Eastwick into the Delaware River. And what this model allows us to do is to play with various scenarios. So we can change the amount of precipitation that occurs. We can change the amount of sea level that occurs. We can put in specific storms, and I'll show you in a moment what happens when we put in the rainfall behind Isaias, and look at then the pattern of flooding that develops in Eastwick. And then we can use that tool to develop adaptation scenarios that the community finds interesting and worthwhile, and then put them into the model, and then look at how historical conditions or even future conditions would be different if these adaptation solutions were in place. Just for those of you who don't think in terms of a watershed, The flooding in Eastwick occurs for a variety of reasons, right? So of course there's flow that comes in from the Darby and the Cobbs River due to precipitation that doesn't occur necessarily in Eastwick, that occurs upstream. And that's called fluvial flooding. So that's when the Cobbs Creek overflows its banks. Then you could have a different type of flooding, right? You could have a surge, a tropical storm, a nor'easter that pushes water up the Delaware estuary and then pushes water into Eastwick from the bottom. And that we can call coastal flooding. Of course, you could have rain in Eastwick itself that can't get out because it's trapped because of the topography or because of the infrastructure. And then, of course, you could have all of these things happening together. And that's really the focus of our research has been not just to prepare, because if you develop a solution against one of these types of flooding, and then the other type occurs, you haven't really solved the problem. So we've been looking at these sort of compound conditions. This graphic is a little hard to read, and I wish I had, there you go. So Eastwick is right down here, and the larger watershed goes up this way. And the colors tell you how much rain occurred, and you can see this number. The red is sort of 7 inches. So this is actually the precipitation that occurred during Isaias. And you can see Eastwick didn't have anywhere near as much precipitation that occurred further up in the watershed. But then as that precipitation hit the ground, became runoff and flowed down the streams, it's what caused this. So I just want to sort of make this point, why it's important to kind of think in this watershed perspective. One of my classes last year worked with Eastwick United to develop a survey, and many of you who are here tonight may have filled out that survey. We got about 100 responses. I don't have time to talk about all of the responses, but we asked questions about how, for example, how flood impacts residents of Eastwick. And you can see here some of the responses: monetary losses, psychological stress, time off from work, time off to clean up, difficulty getting to work or school. So lots of different ways that flooding impacts residents. And then we also, one of the questions was, if you look back the last couple of years and you tried to put a dollar value on your monetary losses, and you can see the vast majority of the people experience between $5,000 and $20,000 worth of damages. That's a significant quantity. And there's even some with much more than that. And then as climate changes, as we're gathering here tonight in climate year, you can imagine, as if this is Eastwick situated between the Delaware River and this upstream watershed, as the sea rises and as the precipitation gets more intense, it sort of sandwiches Eastwick in between these two sets of threats. And that's really that compound flooding that we've been sort of so focused on. So I want to show a simulation produced by our partner, Stevens Institute of Technology. What's going to happen in a moment when I click on it is you're going to see, this is Eastwick over here. This is the community of Eastwick, just to orient you. This is the landfill. This is 84th Street. This, of course, is the airport. And then these blue colors are where the extent of the water. Use the mouse, not the pointer. Okay, I will. Got it. Okay, sorry about that, those of you in the Zoom world. So I'll just point those things out really quickly. This is the airport, this is 84th Street, this is the landfill, this is the Planet Streets. And what's going to happen when I click on this slide is you're going to see the tides going in and out right before the rainfall of Isaias occurred. And then you're going to see at the top of the screen, you're going to see as that storm surge, as the precipitation, sorry, this is not a storm surge, as the precipitation flows down, you'll see how it overflowed. So now you see the tide going out right before, and then the tide coming back in. And now you're going to start seeing blue at the top of the screen as the runoff from further upstream that comes down, and you see it now beginning to overflow into the Planet Streets and then overflowing the community. So this is preliminary. This is research, right? So this is work in progress. This model, our next step in this model is to sort of look at what the simulation says, and then talk to some of the information we got from the survey, and some of the information that's been collected by others shows high water marks and where people live, just to see if this model is representing what actually happened. And then once we've done that, and we're confident that the model is good, we can then put things into the model, put in a barrier, put in raise buildings, move people, et cetera, and see how the impacts would be different. But I want to sort of point out something else, which I think is really important. This next slide, this shows kind of at the end of that simulation when the floodwaters in Isaias, where the water was. But when I click again, what you're going to see is on the right here, this is a regular everyday high tide, but with 3.3 feet of sea level rise. And we can debate when that's going to happen. It might happen in 50 years, 80 years, 100 years. We can debate when that happens. But you see, if I flip back before, this is what this particular extreme event did. And this is what will be an everyday high tide when you have 3.3 feet of sea level rise. And just for contrast, on the left is today's high tide, right? And this, you can see today's high tide, it inundates some of the areas down further, but you don't have that water there. So this just goes to show that today's extreme event could be tomorrow's normal if we don't do something different. So of course, then the question is, what can you do? And if you look, and some of the students who are working with me right now are looking around the world, actually, at examples from different cities and different countries about how people are coping with this new normal. And of course, you could talk about upstream intervention. So you could, and we are in fact using the model to look at what would happen if further up in the watershed, outside of Philadelphia, there were changes in land use, there were more trees, there was the ground was made more absorbent. What would happen? And if you expanded the floodplain of the Darby and the Cobbs Creeks further upstream, what would happen? But then there's things that you can do downstream in Eastwick itself, and you're familiar with these, right? You can build a levee to protect. Of course, then the question becomes, where do you build the levee? You can protect against Cobbs Creek, but as I showed in another simulation, in the future, with the sea level rise, the water could be coming in a different direction. You could retreat, which means leaving, abandoning ship, leaving. But that's, I would argue, from the conversations that I've had with residents of Eastwick, that's culturally devastating. This is a community where people have raised families and for generations, and leaving is not something that's easy to discuss. You can do something called wet and dry proofing, which is to do things to buildings and to your houses so that when the water, either the water can't get in, or if it comes in, the building is specially prepared so that you don't have damage. And that involves moving infrastructure and changing, doing massive retrofits to buildings. Or you can have, and this is an idea that sort of popped up in some of the student effort that I was leading over this past year and in consultation with Eastwick United and others, a land swap. And I want to talk a little bit about this because it was piloted actually in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. This is an image that shows what was done. And the concept really was to take owners or residents who lived in damaged properties and allow them to exchange their title for the title to a home that is in the same neighborhood but less vulnerable. So participants swapped their title for a new flood-proofed home. And the original properties, the flood vulnerable properties, are demolished, and perhaps that space becomes a public space, perhaps it becomes a wetland, perhaps it becomes a park. But the displaced, these individuals who've then moved within the community from one place to another, they haven't had to leave. They're still, kids can probably still go to the same schools, but they're living in a higher elevation land in that same community. And this, as I mentioned, was a $20 million program that was piloted or was implemented actually in the 9th Ward in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. So the students sort of saw this precedent and started to think about it. And in fact, we built into the survey that we distributed to Eastwick residents a question, would you consider moving out of your home in the community, if there were an option to do so? And you can see here, there was a vast majority of people said either yes or maybe. So there was some receptivity to this idea. And then what my students started to do was some mapping. And we looked at, and this image here shows, as Claudia mentioned, the area of sinking homes. And these are the planet streets, and these are the areas that both through our survey and through some of the other data that was collected, these are the homes that were most impacted by some of the recent events. And then you see we've got these three publicly owned parcels. So if you count them up, it's about 600 vulnerable homes, either vulnerable because they're near to the Cobbs Creek or because they're in the sinking homes area. And you've got 187.6 acres of vacant publicly owned land, 128 acres of which is south of 84th Street. And so what the students started to do is to then put elevations on this and to think about it. And there's a lot of colors here, and it's hard to really read. But what we found was that overlapping with some of that publicly owned land was actually some higher elevation land. And so there is, similar to what happened in New Orleans, the option to move folks from some of the places where flooding occurs most regularly to a new redesigned development that's still in Eastwick. It takes advantage of that available public land, and it allows people to stay in their community but reduce the vulnerability. And so the students have started some very general sort of concepts here to just sort of think this through and just to see if could you fit those 600 vulnerable families, households in this space. And the answer is perhaps. It seems that way depending on how you design that development. And it might be that it's not the same form of development. It might be people who live in detached homes now live in townhouses or in other types of development. But this is a concept that we're exploring, and once we sort of think it through a little bit further, we can put it into the model and then see, well, if you rerun Isaias and people weren't living where they were, but they were living here, how different would the impacts have been on people's livelihood? Of course, there will always be, as I mentioned, there's going to be sea level rise, there's going to be more extreme events in the future. So the design of this community, this new community, would be really important to think about. And there's all these different ideas. Do you elevate? Do you surround this new development with its own berm? Do you allow water to come in? Do you keep water from coming in? Are certain segments of this actually floating? There's a lot of really interesting design ideas that can be elaborated further. And that's actually what the students, a new team of students who, some of whom are here tonight, are working on with us. So this is all sort of preliminary. It's ongoing. We wanted to kind of talk to you a little bit about it tonight. The next step is to now talk further about these concepts and see from a community acceptability standpoint, from a physical flood vulnerability standpoint, what would happen under existing conditions, and then most importantly, how would this new development or new concept of swapping homes fare in the future as you have these various types of climate change occurring. And we've discussed part of this with the city, and there's a discussion that I believe is in the planning to talk about this idea. So with that, I'd like to continue the presentation with some testimonials that were recorded by Eastwick United of some of the experiences in the community.
I am Naria Butler. I lived at 8119 Angelo Place in Eastwick when Hurricane Isaias came through. I lived there for 11 years, going on, and I was entering into my 12th year. I did not own my home. I was a leaser, and there were 13 of us that were leaser in our cul-de-sac. Hurricane Isaias changed my life of myself and my community. It came all of a sudden in our cul-de-sac because we turned out that we were on an EPA site as well, and they were doing work from EPA. So a lot of the trees that we had in the park were no longer there. And as a result, Cobbs Creek, the sewer system, and the toxic waste from the EPA system mixed with the floodwaters came into all of our homes. We are grateful to the fire department because they boated us out. 2 of us were able to be boated out of our front door, but the rest of our community was boated out of the 2nd floor. They came out of their windows. My neighbors, Miss Val and Mr. Charlie, were seniors. I call them my Barbie and Ken. They have such love for one another. When the fire and rescue came, they were sitting in the room. Because of health issues, they could not get upstairs to their 2nd floor. By the time the fire and rescue came, the water had gone up to like our 3rd floor step, and they got them just in time. Since our homes are built on slab, the water was coming in not only from the back door, but it was also coming up through the pavement. It was just elevating and rising very, very rapidly. Our lives changed forever. The sad thing about it was that we did not get reported in the news accurately. We had to call the news media. Our governor visited Manayung and some other places, but no one came to check on us. The only place that we could get assistance is the Office of Emergency Management. For leasers, Hurricane Isaias hit on the 4th. We were told to vacate by that Saturday. Now you're trying to obtain money to put what little you have left in storage. There is no aid. Unfortunately, Office of Emergency Management is set up for homeless people. They're not set up for hurricane victims. They handle you in the donation as if you were homeless, because that's the department that we were referred to. That's where the funding came from. And so now you're devastated, and now you have someone really trying to talk to you like you're deliberately indigent. We're not indigent. We've been victimized by a natural disaster, and really, we are traumatized. They gave us some assistance. What you may consider help at the amount of that we pay for leasing, that's not restorative. There was no restorative measure from our city nor at our state level for any of us. The amount of money that was offered to me from Office of Emergency Management was not enough to keep me in the Eastwick community or keep me at the same level that I was living going into any other community in Philadelphia. There was an opportunity for a loan, but to ask me to pay for a loan in the midst of COVID, when they're scrutinizing credit in a different manner, through a different lens, okay, that victimizes us all together again, because you're not saying here's a grant, you're saying, okay, you have to apply for a loan, and now you hear no for your help. Flood insurance does not help leasers. Flood insurance, we did not know that property managers are not required to let you know that you're in a flood zone when you're leasing. Our leases were terminated. If we are to go back into our same development, we had to reestablish our lease all over again. At the current market value, that was disheartening, very, very disheartening. EPA was chlorinating our block constantly. That's how toxic it was without really telling people the level of toxicity. There are some people doing that I personally know that when they were cleaning out their home, they developed skin rashes. And nobody is resolving that. Nobody wants to handle that. Nobody wants to acknowledge that. But they got skin rashes, they got boils for pulling their stuff outside of their house. And this is where our governor and our government, our local government needed to have a heart. The creeks collided, the sewer system collided, and all the stuff from the EPA site went through our homes. There was no heart about anything or any damage to them. We love Philly. We are Philadelphians. We love our city. I think at that particular time, we needed our city to love us back. The only way that you get some sort of recovery is through FEMA. And right now, we're not set up, and nobody from Hurricane Isaias got any FEMA funds. If this does nothing else but it educates, because none of us know when we will become a victim of natural disasters.
My name is Lisa Woodford, and I live on Venus Place, and I've been living there for 3 years now. On August 4th, when Tropical Storm Isaias hit, I remember just looking out the window, watching the rain, and I just thought everything was going to be just a normal day. And so I noticed that people started running down the street. I was like, what's going on? And so my neighbor started knocking on everybody's door, telling them to move their car. And I was like, why? But I did. I went outside and I moved my car. And then when I came back, I noticed that the water started filling up the street. It just started flooding. It was just so much water coming so quickly. And I was scared. And I didn't know what was going on. There was nothing on the news. No police, nothing, no reports like to tell you that something is going on, that we're flooding. So I had to rely on the neighbors because I was new. So they were already used to the flooding. I've never experienced that before. So they were the ones that, kind of helped me through everything and was very supportive. And just the amount of fear that I had, because it was the fear of the unknown, not knowing what was going to happen next. As the waters continued to flood, I noticed that they had got boats to rescue some of the people behind us on Saturn Place. And then they were saying that if it didn't stop, that they would have to rescue us on Venus Place. And then I was just so scared because I was like, I don't want to be shipped out of my home on a boat. I was like, this is something, you see this stuff like on the news and in different places like New Orleans and stuff. You would never think that this would happen here. And it was just so scary. I can't describe the amount of fear that I felt. Like, I still have nightmares sometimes about this, and when it rains, I get scared. Like when it's a big rain, it's trauma. I'm traumatized. Like, I used to love the rain, and I don't like it. I don't enjoy the rain anymore because I'm thinking that maybe my house will get flooded again, or who knows what could happen. The water just came up so fast, and it just was like all of a sudden, it was so much damage. It was not just damage to property, it was damage to your soul. I didn't know where to go, what to do. No one could get in. My family, they couldn't come in to rescue us. So they were like out like by Lindbergh Boulevard. And then they told us that we could leave. But then there was all of this cleanup that had to be done. That took a while for the cleanup. I just remember just sweeping so much water that day. I didn't know water could do that much damage. It was water all in my basement. I had just bought my home, totally renovated everything. And then as soon as I got everything done, the flood hit. And so I had to pretty much renovate stuff again. But at the time, I didn't have flood insurance because I didn't know it was a flood zone area. So I had to take my savings and finish up like rebuilding my basement again. I had help from Eastwick United. They were so lovely. They called, people gave me support. And it was just the little things that was so helpful, like people just giving support. I remember you guys gave us a $50 gift card. You might not think that was a lot, but for me, that was like somebody giving me $5 million because it was just so helpful. Every little thing helped. The support of the neighbors that we had, just community organizations, when Kenyatta came out and gave us the food, all of that was just grateful, like to just know that we weren't being forgotten, because I feel like it was just such a disparity between us and other communities with this flooding situation that we don't get what we should get. It took months of rebuilding, everything having to be gutted and thrown out, your furniture, your memories. Like some of those things aren't replaceable, like your your things are replaceable, but your memories and just things that you share with your family members. And I saw when riding through or just walking through my community, I saw people's memories on the street. Just you could feel the sadness, because you can see people's little doll houses, just things that we use every day. And I was just happy that I was alive and that I didn't have to be rescued in a boat. And it was just, like I said, it was very traumatic, very, very traumatic. And I hope I don't have to go through this ever again, because I'm still recuperating from it. It was just so nice after the flood, just touched by the kindness of my neighbors and just the people in my community, like how everyone just stuck together and trying to fight to make everything better, because I really like it here in this community. I just think it's a nice neighborhood, you know, it's really peaceful, and I would hate to have to move. I don't want to move, but I really am. I'm contemplating it, because I don't want to have to go through this again. I just don't want to see my life destroyed again.
Okay, so I'd like to invite Ms. Carolyn back for some closing thoughts.
Those testimonies were very compelling. And one of the testimonies are here with us tonight. And I'd like to thank you for sharing that testimony, Ms. Lisa Whitford. And wrapping this up, you see this slide here. There are many things that we have to do. First of all, I want to recognize that there are 2 community organizations that are championing this whole initiative. And I'd like to recognize not only the board members from Eastwick United, but also Eastwick Friends and Neighbors Coalition. It takes a village, not just a village, but it takes a community to tackle the struggle, this uphill struggle that this community is facing. Eastwick is a community in crisis, and for anyone to think of it as anything less is sadly mistaken, because we see our manicured lawns, quiet neighborhood. Doesn't mean that everything is okay when you go in and shut your door. There's a lot of work to be done, so we need help. We need to remain united. We need volunteers. And here's what I'd like to call the peace approach to help us to achieve environmental justice and equality. We need participation. We need to get out there, and everybody in the community needs to come together. We have petitions that Councilman Johnson's office has developed for us to sign, because we need to be in line for some of that money when it comes, from the Biden-Harris administration for that infrastructure bill, because that's going to be the key. Every time we ask the city or anybody to come to our assistance, nobody has any money. And what's really sad, and it is a statistical fact, Philadelphia is the largest, brokest city in the country. You heard the testimonies where it said, we love our city, but we need it to love us back. It didn't love us in our time of need. So we need signatures. Attend community meetings. Get out there and tell your neighbors. Get on those Zoom calls. We bring a lot of good information. We learn a lot of good, a lot of organizations, a lot of city departments, and otherwise come on to share information and knowledge with all of us. Bring skills to the table. there's a lot of work to be done. And what's consistent are the board members of each of the organizations that were just mentioned. But we need everybody. Everybody has a skill set and something to offer. Educate yourself. Learn about these issues. We had to. And then we can educate others. Then we can advocate for ourselves because no one's advocating for you. Then communicate, inform your neighbors, help distribute information, any literature that's out there. We will be selling t-shirts. We can now become walking ambassadors for our own cause. And that way we will then become elevated. Your mind shines brightest when you enlighten others, your heart when you encourage others, your soul when you elevate others, and your life when you empower others. Peace.
Thanks so much, Caroline. So that concludes our program. We do invite you to stay involved. For those of you who have attended on Zoom, we will distribute the link to this video and some information, the petition that Carolyn mentioned. For those of you here in person, we've got petitions and other materials that we'll hand out on the way out. So with that, I'd like to conclude the program. Thank you all for attending. Thank our sponsors and wish you a good rest of the weekend.